Donald Trump is not the first American president to backstab the American allies. Here's every time that I could think of that the United States backstabbed people that they would consider their allies. During the American Revolution in the 1770s and 1780s, the United States was not alone in fighting off the tyrannical British. The French, who had notoriously been the enemy of the British since ever, had been the top outside force aiding the United States in their revolutionary efforts. It has been said that without the help of the French monarchy, the United States wouldn't have beaten the British in the Revolution. At the end of the 1780s, the French were going on their own revolution. The French Revolution was a war for liberty and self governance in the same boat as the American Revolution. The American president, renowned George Washington, not only supported the rebels in the Revolution, but refused to send aid to either side in the Revolution, famously issuing the Proclamation of Neutrality on the 22nd of April, 1793. In the same year, the Americans suspended paying off debts to France, and the next year signed the Jay's Treaty with their sworn enemies, the British. In 1783, the French and the Americans were working together to overthrow British tyrannical rule. Literally, only a decade later, the Americans refused to send aid to their first allies in their darkest hour. Okay, hear me out. The Embargo Act of 1807 was very detrimental to both relations with France and Great Britain. This act, signed into law by Thomas Jefferson, was intended to be a deterrent to the French and British impeding on American trade. Jefferson didn't want the French nor the British to control American shipping and trade, so he signed this act to ban trade with both France and Britain, with the thought process of, well, if one of them won't stop, we'll just trade with the other one. Not only was this thought process a failure, as both France and Britain refused to trade with the United States, it was detrimental to both the American economy, which needed to be protected as the new nation who just gained their independence, and the trust of France and Britain, who had viewed the nation as an ally in North America. On the 18th of June, 1812, the United States, under President James Madison, declared war on British North America. Sure, the United States and the United Kingdom obviously didn't have the best of relations, but the United States was completely in the wrong to declare this war. In 1794, both Britain and the United States signed the Jay's Treaty, which was meant to keep the peace between the two nations and tried to avoid such a conflict. To be clear, James Madison was not an advocate for the war. He believed that a war like this should be avoided, not due to the Jay's Treaty, but because it would be detrimental to the American experiment, which it very nearly was. However, I think it's fair to blame President Madison and the United States Congress for declaring a war that was forbidden by American signatures less than 20 years earlier. Oh, yes, I am aware that Argentina and the United States were not allies in 1833, but just a decade prior, President James Monroe spoke into existence the Monroe Doctrine. The doctrine explicitly said if any European powers meddled in the affairs of the Americas, America will intervene. However, when the British invaded and took over the Falkland Islands in 1833, President Jackson did jack squat about it, dishonoring the now deceased President Monroe and his influential doctrine. Easily the war that the most amount of Americans can't think of at the top of their heads is the Spanish American War. This war was a war of colonialism. Initially, President McKinley initiated the war to get rid of Spanish control over Cuba and the Philippines. However, after successfully getting rid of the Spanish, the United States let Cuba become independent, but the Philippines still had American troops. The Filipinos revolted against a tyrannical monarchy. Let the freest nation on earth put their troops in their country to fight back against the Spanish, just for them to be colonized by the Liberty Granters. The United States backstabbed the Philippines by promising freedom, but they ended up being in American territory until 1946. Easily the dumbest monetary act of the 20th century, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts passed through Congress with relative ease. These tariffs were in response to the Great Depression. President Herbert Hoover's brilliant idea to end the Great Depression was to raise tariffs on American goods on other countries so they'd have to pay more to America and therefore get more money. These tariffs were imposed on pretty much everyone, with harsher tariffs imposed on American allies because they traded more. Not only did countries that the US imposed tariffs on impose retaliatory tariffs, but stopped trading with the US altogether, devastating the American economy and hurting influence with countries like Canada, who flocked back to the arms of Great Britain, reducing American influence in the country. Let me be clear. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki aren't a backstab to America's wonderful ally of Japan, but to the Soviet Union. Remember, while the Soviets and the Americans disagreed on quite a bit, they both fought on the Allies in World War II. America's decision to foster nuclear bombs and drop on Japan was a very unheard of idea. This made President Franklin Roosevelt keep the operation very undercover and secretive, so secretive that not even Vice President Harry Truman knew about the Manhattan Project. While secrecy is good, too much secrecy, especially with your friends, can make them bad. The United States knew that the Soviet Union was planning an invasion of Japan, so the decision to drop the bombs on August 6 and August 9 was more of a let's get the Soviet Union out of here decision than a let's get Japan out of here decision. This secrecy hurt relations with the Soviet Union and arguably caused the Cold War in its entirety. In 1953, newly elected President Dwight Eisenhower ordered the CIA, with the help of the British SIS, to overthrow the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. This coup d'etat was supposed to reinstate the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and regain Western influence in Iran. However, the coup had significant disadvantages, like the weakening of Iranian democracy. The Shah was later overthrown in 1979, leading to the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran, an Iran which to this day is still overly hostile to the United States. One of the first things the new Islamic Republic of Iran did was kidnap a bunch of Americans, kicking off the Iranian hostage crisis as a direct result of Operation Ajax. It wasn't until help arrived from Canada with Prime Minister Joe Clark were the hostages finally released. During the 1971 War for Bangladesh independence, Richard Nixon, now President of the United States, took the side of Pakistan. This was a clear backstabbing of India, who had been a loyal ally with the United States since independence from the British Raj. Nixon was very concerned that this was a Soviet Indian war against China, a rapidly emerging US ally, and tried to prevent the spread of communism to the region. Nixon actively supported Pakistan by sending a carrier battle group to the Bay of Bengal to deter Indian intervention, and also waiting until the end of the war in 1972 to officially recognize Bangladeshi independence, further solidifying an alliance with Pakistan against the Indians. In the 1980s, under President Ronald Reagan, Iran would be the center of attention once more. It was because the president illegally sold weapons to the new Iranian government and, in return, was granted the release of American hostages and the Contras. The Contras were a far right terrorist group. President Reagan enjoyed them because they were killing communists. These dealings were highly illegal and career ending if it was a president with less charm. This was a violation of Congress and the trust given to the Reagan administration by American allies, since they were not aware of these dealings, nor did they get any compensation in the end. So there you have it. Donald Trump is not the first president to backstab his allies. Although I think the degree of which he is probably unheard of, especially with how close we were before he became in office. But what do you guys think? Did I miss anything? Because I'm almost certain that I did. Do you think one of these that I put in wasn't really a backstab? I'd like to hear your feedback.